Just look back 2 verses to kind of get these two focused. I want to begin reading verse 16 and 17, but then we have read in the past 1 through 15. But let me read 16 and 17, and then we'll go back and get verse 14. Paul says, y'all there? Where are you? 16 and 17. Paul says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous shall live by faith. And so I want to talk about from faith to faith. But I want to go back just a couple of verses and pick up verse 14. We had talked about Paul and his love for the capital city church. But I want us to look at verse 14 and let's grab that. Paul says, I am under obligation. He says, I am a debtor. I am in debt to God for the ministry that He's given me. I'm a debtor. Now you remember in Acts chapter 9 and verse 15, where Paul is called, and we have Ananias who comes to Paul, and as Paul is blind, he doesn't want to touch Paul. They don't want to have anything to do with him. And somehow God convinces him to go to Paul on the street called Straight, go to Paul and touch him so that his eyes might be open, so that he would understand, Paul would understand he is under obligation. He's a debtor. And he's a debtor because of all that God has allowed Paul to go through. All of the life Paul had been able to live, and he lived it outside of God. And we know, the Bible says, the soul that sins shall die. And so Paul, when he got knocked off his beast on that road to Damascus, a light shone about him, and insight came. He understood that he was a sinner. And Lord have mercy, he was so grateful that God didn't take him that day, because the soul that sins shall die, and die for you and I is to be separated from God. So Paul says, I am a debtor. I am under obligation. And without distinction, I don't make a distinction. Look at that 14th verse. I don't make a distinction. First, he says, I want to suggest that I have been called both to the Greeks, barbarians, both to the wise and to the unmindful, unwise. Look at the verse. Let's walk through this with me. I am under obligation both to the Greeks. And Greeks, by the way, I'm not going to spend too much time on that because we're trying to go where? Verse 16 and 17. Greeks, by the way, were very cultured people. And if you know anything about the history of the Bible, you know that God used the Greeks because their language was so picturesque. Hebrew has very hard and rough kind of pictures, but the Greeks had beautiful pictures of what God was trying to say to them. And so he uses this word, debtor, and right away, for those who were in Rome, they would wonder, now what does it mean to be a debtor? We're Greeks here. You know, we're Roman citizens. We're not Hebrews, we're Roman citizens. We're free. And we don't understand the concept of being in debt. We're on top. We're the dominant culture. So Paul says in their own language, I'm under obligation. And I'm under obligation to you first, meaning to those who are not Hebrews, although he was. And then he says in this passage, not only am I under obligation to the Greeks, but also to the barbarians, also to those who had very rough language. In Matthew chapter 6 talks about this quite a bit. Where Jesus says, when you pray, don't be like the barbarians who pray. And don't be like that, because they think that because of their repetitiveness, God-given, just kind of repeating the same kind of thing over and over, that they'll get their requests from God. But God says to you and I and to the Hebrews, he says, listen, when you pray, go into your closet and close the door and pray to your Father who is in heaven in secret. And your Father who is in heaven will answer your prayer, reward you openly. Well, because in that passage, you need to look at it when you get a chance in that 6th chapter of Matthew. The priests, they used to come out in their fine garb. I mean, the robes. I probably should have brought my robe today. But they're beautiful robes. And when it was time for prayer, and I think our Muslim brothers picked this up, when it was time for prayer, they would just stop wherever they were, and they would offer God these great, grandiose prayers. Jesus said they get nothing, because